The contract arrived on Zachary Rourke's desk just after dawn, and he nearly spilled his tea when he saw the offer price written in neat, block-shaped letters. 0 gold, 0 silver, 0 copper. The woman standing across from him was an orc, green-skinned and broad-shouldered, with small tusks that barely cleared her upper lip. She wore leather armor that had seen better days and kept her expression neutral while his clerk, a nervous man named Pemberton, hovered near the door wringing his hands. "Miss Kira Larenth," Zachary said, setting down his cup with care. "You understand that I am a circuit judge. The threats against my life are credible. 3 other bodyguards have declined the contract even at market rates." "I read the bounty notice," she said. Her voice was low and even. "The Harrow family. You sentenced the eldest son to hang for murder last spring." "I did." Zachary folded his hands on his desk. He was 42, lean, with silver threading his dark hair at the temples. His face had the lines of a man who had seen too much and slept too little. "They have sworn revenge. My circuit takes me through 5 territories over the next 3 months. Lonely roads, small villages, many opportunities for ambush. Then you need protection. At no cost." He tapped the contract. "Forgive me, but I must ask why." She met his eyes without flinching. "I need the reference. A circuit judge's recommendation opens doors. You need someone who will not run when the Harrows come." "I do not run." It was a reasonable answer. Too reasonable, perhaps, but Zachary had learned long ago that desperation made strange bargains on both sides. He scanned the contract again. Standard terms. 4-month engagement, renewable. Duties clearly outlined. He had Pemberton witness his signature and pressed his seal into warm wax. "Welcome to my service, Miss Larenth." She took the contract, folded it precisely, and tucked it into her belt. "We leave at dawn." "Dawn," he agreed. She nodded once and left. Pemberton emerged from his corner. "Sir, an orc is perhaps the only guard willing to take the job," Zachary said quietly. "Prepare the travel documents. We have a long road ahead." They departed under a sky streaked pink and gold. Zachary rode his steady mare, Pemberton drove the document wagon, and Kira walked alongside, her long strides eating the miles without apparent effort. She carried a sword and a short spear, both weapons worn but well maintained. The first 2 days passed without incident. They stopped at an inn the second night, a squat building that smelled of old beer and wood smoke. The innkeeper stared at Kira but took Zachary's coin readily enough. 3 rooms. 1 for the judge, 1 for the clerk, 1 for the guard. Zachary was reviewing case notes by candlelight when someone knocked. He opened the door to find Kira standing in the hallway, a bedroll under one arm. "Miss Larenth, your room," she said. "I will sleep on the floor." He blinked. "I beg your pardon, standard protection protocol. I must be in the room to respond to threats." "I appreciate your diligence, but that is hardly necessary. The inn is secure." "No inn is secure." She stepped past him, unrolled her bedding near the door, and sat cross-legged on it. "You may continue your work." Zachary opened his mouth, closed it, and decided that arguing with a woman holding a sword was poor strategy. He returned to his desk. She sat motionless, watching the door. After an hour, he gave up on concentration and went to bed. He woke once in the night and saw her still sitting upright, silhouetted against the faint moonlight from the window. The third day brought them to the village of Millbrook, where Zachary was scheduled to hear cases. The local magistrate had prepared a docket: property disputes, a theft, 1 assault. Routine work. Zachary set up court in the village hall while Kira stood by the door, arms crossed, surveying everyone who entered. An old woman brought a complaint against her neighbor for diverting a stream. Zachary listened, examined the surveyor's maps, and ruled in her favor. A young man accused of stealing chickens wept and confessed. Zachary sentenced him to restitution and 6 months of community labor. The assault case was murkier. 2 men who had fought over a woman, both bruised, both stubborn. Zachary fined them equally and warned them that the next fight would see jail time. It was satisfying work. It always had been. The law was a tool, imperfect but necessary, and Zachary wielded it with care. That night, Kira again appeared at his door with her bedroll. This time he did not argue. She took her post and stayed awake through the darkness. On the 5th day, Pemberton approached Zachary during a rest stop. The clerk was pale, his eyes darting to where Kira was checking the wagon wheels. "Sir," Pemberton said quietly, "I was reviewing the contracts this morning. Miss Larenth's agreement. There is a clause, in the margin, very small writing." Pemberton produced the document and pointed. Zachary squinted. The text was cramped, squeezed into a space barely wider than his thumbnail. He fetched his reading glasses and bent close. Bodyguard retains the right to provide warmth and comfort as conditions require, including but not limited to shared sleeping arrangements during cold nights, embraces for morale, and cuddling as deemed necessary for the principal's well-being. Principal acknowledges that emotional security is integral to physical security. His face burned. This cannot be. "I already signed it, sir," Pemberton said miserably. "As witness, it is binding." Zachary stared at the words, cuddling. She had written cuddling into a professional contract. He marched over to where Kira was tightening a strap. "Miss Larenth, a word," she straightened. "Yes," he held up the contract. "Explain this clause." She glanced at it without surprise. Standard. Bodyguards must maintain their principal's morale. Cold and isolation weaken resolve. The clause ensures I can fulfill my duties. "This is highly irregular. It is signed," she said calmly. "Do you wish to break the contract?" He wanted to. He should. But the image of the Harrow family's faces at the trial rose in his mind, the cold hatred in their eyes, the whispered promises as they were dragged from the courtroom. He needed protection. She had not failed him yet. "No," he said finally, "but I expect professional conduct at all times." "Of course." She returned to the wagon. Zachary stood there, the contract in his hand, feeling outmaneuvered and not entirely sure how it had happened. The weather turned cold as they climbed into the hill country. Frost crisped the grass each morning and their breath misted in the air. At night, Zachary piled every blanket the inns provided onto his bed and still woke shivering on the 8th night in a drafty room above a tavern. Kira laid out her bedroll and then paused. "You are cold." "I am fine." "You are shivering. I can hear your teeth." "Miss Larenth, the clause." "We are not invoking the clause." She crossed her arms. "You signed it. Under duress. You were not threatened. You read it. You signed it." She picked up her blanket and approached the bed. "I am invoking it now. Move over." "Absolutely not. You will catch ill." "An ill judge cannot hold court. Move over." There was no winning this argument. Zachary, feeling his dignity crumble, shifted to one side of the narrow bed. Kira lay down on top of the covers, still fully dressed in her armor, and draped her blanket over both of them. Heat radiated from her like a furnace. Zachary had not realized how cold he had been until warmth seeped into his bones. He lay rigid, staring at the ceiling, acutely aware of her presence. "Relax," she said. "I do not bite. This is entirely inappropriate. This is survival." He wanted to argue further, but exhaustion and warmth conspired against him. His eyes drifted closed. For the first time in a week, he slept deeply. When he woke, she was already up, repacking her gear as though nothing unusual had occurred. They reached the town of Greystone on the 10th day. Larger than Millbrook, Greystone had a proper courthouse and a jail. The docket was heavier: contract disputes, a boundary conflict, 2 cases of fraud and 1 murder trial. The murder was a grim affair. A merchant had been stabbed in an alley, his purse taken. The accused was a drifter with blood on his shirt and no alibi. The evidence was damning. Zachary heard testimony for 2 days, weighed the facts, and delivered his verdict, guilty. The sentence was death by hanging. The man wept. The victim's widow wept. Zachary signed the order with a steady hand and a hollow feeling in his chest. That night, Kira did not wait for him to protest. She simply climbed into the bed beside him, and he did not have the strength to object. She was warm and solid, and when he finally slept, his dreams were dark. He woke once in the night, tangled in blankets, his heart racing from a nightmare he could not quite remember. Kira's hand rested lightly on his shoulder. "Breathe," she said softly. He breathed. The nightmare faded. He slept again. In the morning, he did not mention it, and neither did she. The days blurred together. Travel and trials, cold nights, and Kira's steady presence. She never spoke unless necessary, never complained, and never wavered. Zachary found himself noticing small things. The way she checked his mare's hooves each morning, the efficiency with which she scouted ahead on dangerous roads, the quiet competence in everything she did. He also noticed that she was not as stoic as she pretended. Once when they passed a peddler selling honey cakes, she slowed and stared at them with barely concealed longing. Zachary bought 2. She accepted hers with surprise and ate it in careful, deliberate bites, making it last. "You like sweets," he observed. "Yes. You should have said." She shrugged. "It is not necessary." But after that, he made a point of buying small treats when they were available. She never thanked him outright, but her eyes softened each time. The threat from the Harrows had been quiet, but Zachary knew it was only a matter of time. On the 16th day, as they approached the village of Ashford, Kira suddenly raised her hand. Zachary reined in his horse. Pemberton stopped the wagon. "What is it?" Zachary asked. Kira was staring at the road ahead, her expression unreadable. "Tracks, horses." "At least 4 stopped here recently. They waited. Bandits, perhaps." She dismounted and examined the ground more closely. "Or the Harrows." Zachary's stomach tightened. "What do? We continue, but carefully." She looked up at him, and for the first time he saw something other than calm in her eyes. Worry, perhaps, or determination. "Stay close to me, do not leave my sight." They proceeded slowly. The road wound through dense forest, the trees pressing close on both sides. Shadows stretched long in the afternoon light. Zachary's hand drifted to the knife at his belt, though he knew it would be useless in a real fight. The attack came at a narrow bend. 4 riders burst from the trees, swords drawn, faces masked. Kira moved before Zachary could even shout. She yanked him from his horse, shoved him behind the wagon, and met the first rider with her spear. The fight was brutal and fast. Kira fought like nothing Zachary had ever seen, precise, ruthless, efficient. She unseated one rider, drove her spear through another's shoulder, and deflected a sword strike that would have taken her head off. Pemberton screamed and dove under the wagon. Zachary crouched, useless, as steel rang against steel. One of the attackers broke past Kira and charged toward Zachary. Time slowed. The man raised his sword. Zachary fumbled for his knife. He was going to die. Kira tackled the man from behind, bearing him to the ground. They grappled. The man's sword went flying. Kira's fist connected with his jaw once, twice, and he went limp. The remaining attacker wheeled his horse and fled. Kira did not pursue. She stood, breathing hard, and scanned the forest for more threats. Blood dripped from a cut on her arm. "Are you hurt?" she asked Zachary. He stared at her. You are bleeding. Are you hurt?" she repeated. "No." "No, I am not hurt." "Good." She walked over to the unconscious attacker and pulled off his mask. A young man, dark-haired, with a family resemblance Zachary recognized immediately. A Harrow, the youngest brother. "They found us," Zachary said numbly. "They did." Kira tied the man's hands with rope from the wagon. "We need to move. The one who fled will bring reinforcements." They left the other attackers where they lay, one dead, two wounded, and pushed hard for Ashford. They arrived after dark, and Zachary insisted Kira see the village healer for her wound. She protested, but he pulled rank for the first time since hiring her. The healer, an elderly woman with sharp eyes, cleaned and stitched the cut while Kira sat stone-faced. Zachary watched, his hands clenched. The sight of her blood made something twist in his chest. When it was done, they returned to the inn. Zachary paid for the best room available, a small luxury, but one he needed. Kira prepared her bedroll, and Zachary stopped her. "The bed is large enough for two." She looked at him, surprise flickering across her face. "You do not have to. You were injured protecting me. Take the bed." "The clause does not require." "I am not invoking the clause," Zachary said quietly. "I am asking." She hesitated, then nodded. They lay down together, not touching, the space between them charged with something Zachary could not name. He listened to her breathing, slow and steady, and wondered when he had started thinking of her as more than just a guard. The next morning, they delivered the captured Harrow brother to the local magistrate. Zachary made a detailed report and sent word ahead to other towns on his circuit. The Harrows were escalating. "They will try again," Kira said as they left the magistrate's office. "I know. You should consider canceling the circuit. Return to the capital." Zachary stopped walking. "I cannot. You are a target. I am a judge. These towns depend on the circuit. If I flee, justice stops." He met her eyes. "I will not abandon my duty." She studied him for a long moment, then nodded. "Then we continue." Over the following days, Zachary found himself watching Kira more than he should. The way she moved, graceful despite her armor, the focus in her eyes when she stood guard. The gentleness with which she tended to his horse, whispering to the mare in a language he did not recognize. He was falling, and he knew it. It was the worst possible timing and the most foolish thing he could do. She was his employee, an orc in a world that barely tolerated her kind, and he was a judge who could not afford scandals or distractions. But when she slept beside him at night, her presence solid and warm, he felt safer than he had in years. They reached the town of Brinwell on the 23rd day. The docket was light, and Zachary finished his cases by mid-afternoon. He dismissed Pemberton early and found himself alone in his chambers, staring at the contract that had started all of this. Kira's handwriting was neat, almost painstakingly so. He wondered how long it had taken her to write that tiny clause in the margin, wondered what had possessed her to include it. He heard the door open and looked up. Kira stood in the doorway, her expression carefully neutral. "I brought dinner," she said, holding up a wrapped bundle. "The tavern had meat pies. Thank you." He gestured to the chair across from his desk. "Join me." She sat, and they ate in companionable silence. The pie was good, rich, and savory. Zachary finished his and set the plate aside. "May I ask you something?" he said. "Yes." "Why did you really volunteer? The truth." Kira set down her own plate. For a moment he thought she would deflect, but then she sighed. "I told you I need the reference. There is more. There is always more." She looked at him, and something shifted in her expression. Vulnerability, carefully guarded. "I want to prove that an orc can be trusted, that we are not monsters. Every job I take, every contract I fulfill, it is a mark in our favor. Your recommendation will carry weight." "It will," Zachary agreed, "but you could have taken other contracts, safer ones." "Safe contracts do not make reputations." It made sense in a bleak sort of way. He wanted to tell her that she should not have to prove herself like this, that the prejudice was wrong and unfair, but he knew the words would ring hollow. The world was what it was. The cuddling clause, he said instead. She tensed. What about it? It was deliberate. You knew I would object. Yes. Why include it? She was quiet for a long time. Finally, she said, because you needed it. I needed a cuddling clause. You needed closeness. You carry yourself like a man who has forgotten how to accept care. She met his eyes. I read your file before I volunteered. 3 years ago, your bodyguard died protecting you from an assassin. Since then, you have refused to hire close guards. You keep everyone at a distance. Zachary felt the blood drain from his face. How did you? Public record. The trial of your attacker was well documented. Her voice softened. You blame yourself for his death. He could not speak. The memory rose sharp and vivid. Marcus stepping in front of him, the blade meant for Zachary sinking into Marcus's chest instead, the light fading from his friend's eyes. I do blame myself, Zachary said hoarsely. He had a family. A wife and 2 children. They died because of me. He died because an assassin attacked, not because you existed. If I had not needed protection, then he would not have been doing his job, but he chose that job just as I chose this one. Kira leaned forward. You honor his memory by refusing protection. You think it keeps others safe, but it only puts you in danger. So you tricked me. I gave you an excuse. She gestured at the contract. You could accept closeness because it was written down, an obligation. Not a choice that might cost someone their life. Zachary stared at her. The anger he wanted to feel would not come. Instead, there was only a terrible, aching gratitude. You are clever, he said quietly. I am a survivor. He stood and walked to the window, looking out at the darkening street. I think about him every day, Marcus. I think about his wife's face when I told her, the way his daughter would not stop crying. You should think of them, Kira said, but not with guilt, with gratitude for what he gave you. How can I be grateful? He died. He died so you could keep delivering justice. How many lives have you changed since then? How many verdicts have protected the innocent? She stood and came to stand beside him. His sacrifice had meaning. Do not cheapen it by wasting what he gave you. Zachary closed his eyes. The words cut deep, but they also soothed something raw and festering inside him. He had carried the guilt for so long it had become part of him, a weight he thought he deserved. Why do you care? He asked. I am just a contract to you. You are a good man, Kira said simply. Good men are rare. They should be protected. He turned to look at her. She was close enough that he could see the flecks of gold in her green eyes, the faint scar above her left tusk. You are extraordinary, he said, and meant it. She blinked, clearly surprised. A flush darkened her cheeks. I am practical. You are both. They stood there, the air between them humming with something unspoken. Zachary wanted to reach for her, to close the small distance and damn the consequences. But he was a coward, and she was under his employ, and the moment passed. We should rest, Kira said finally. Tomorrow we ride for Tanner's Cross. Yes, Zachary agreed, though he did not move. That night she did not ask before joining him in bed. She simply lay down beside him, and he turned toward her without thinking. Her arms came around him, warm and strong, and he let himself be held. For the first time in 3 years, he did not dream of blood. The attack came 2 days later, on the road between Tanner's Cross and Hillshire. This time, there were 6 riders, all masked, all armed with crossbows as well as swords. Kira saw them first. She shoved Zachary off his horse and behind a boulder just as the first bolt whistled past his head. Pemberton screamed and whipped the horses, the wagon careening off the road and into a ditch. Stay down, Kira ordered and charged. Zachary could not stay down. He crouched behind the boulder, knife in hand, and watched in horror as Kira fought 6 armed men alone. She moved like a dancer, like a force of nature, her spear and sword a blur of steel. But even she could not be everywhere at once. A bolt grazed her thigh. She stumbled and 2 men closed in. Zachary's heart stopped. He saw Marcus falling all over again, saw Kira dying in his place, and something inside him broke. He ran. He had no plan, no skill, but he had rage and terror and love, and they drove him forward. He tackled one of the men attacking Kira, bearing him to the ground. They grappled. The man was stronger, but Zachary fought dirty, clawing and biting, and managed to drive his knife into the man's side. The man howled and rolled away. Zachary staggered to his feet, blood on his hands, and looked up to see Kira staring at him in shock. "Get back," she shouted. He did not get back. He picked up the fallen man's sword, too heavy, too awkward, but better than nothing, and stood beside her. The remaining attackers hesitated. They had expected an easy target, not a judge willing to fight. Kira used their hesitation. She lunged, drove her spear through one man's shoulder, and kicked another in the chest hard enough to crack ribs. The last 2 attackers broke and ran. Kira let them go. She turned to Zachary, her face pale. "You idiot! Are you all right?" he demanded. "I am fine." "You could have been killed, so could you?" He dropped the sword, his hands shaking. "I could not just watch. Not again." She stared at him, and then her expression crumpled. She pulled him close, heedless of the blood and the watching Pemberton still huddled by the overturned wagon. Zachary wrapped his arms around her and held on. "I cannot lose you," he whispered into her shoulder. "You will not," she whispered back. They stayed like that for a long moment, the battlefield quiet around them. That night, in a cramped room at the Hillshire Inn, Zachary sat on the edge of the bed while Kira cleaned her wounds. The bolt had carved a shallow furrow in her thigh, painful but not serious. She wrapped it with clean linen and tied off the bandage with practiced efficiency. "You fought today," she said. "I made a fool of myself. You saved my life." He looked up, startled. The man you tackled would have run me through. I was focused on the other." She tied off the bandage and sat beside him. "You saved my life. Then we are even. This is not about keeping score." She took his hand, her fingers rough and warm. "You were brave. I was terrified. Bravery is not the absence of fear. It is acting despite it." Zachary stared at their joined hands. His was pale and ink-stained, hers green and scarred. They should not fit together. By every measure of society they were wrong, but he could not bring himself to care. "Kira," he said quietly, "I need to tell you something." She waited. "I have fallen in love with you." The words hung in the air. Kira's hand tightened around his. "You are my employer," she said carefully. "I know. And if you wish to void the contract because of my feelings, I will understand. I will provide a full reference and pay you what the job was worth. Zachary." He stopped. She so rarely used his given name. "I do not wish to void the contract," she said. "I wish to hear you say it again." His heart stuttered. "I love you." Her smile was small and tentative, but it transformed her face. "I love you also." He kissed her. It was clumsy and tentative and perfect. She cupped his face with her free hand, her thumb tracing his cheekbone, and kissed him back with a tenderness that made his chest ache. When they finally pulled apart, both breathing hard, Zachary laughed. "This is wildly inappropriate. The clause allows it. I do not think cuddling includes kissing. It is implied." He kissed her again, because he could, because she loved him, because the world outside could wait. That night, they held each other not out of obligation or cold, but out of choice. Zachary traced the line of her jaw, the point of her ear, the strength of her shoulder. Kira ran her fingers through his hair and murmured words in her own language, soft and melodic. "What does that mean?" he asked. "It means you are mine," she said. If you wish to be, I wish it. She kissed his temple. Then sleep, my judge, I have you. He slept. The circuit continued, but everything had changed. They no longer hid their closeness. Pemberton was scandalized at first, then resigned, then quietly supportive. The towns they visited had mixed reactions. Some whispered, some stared, some openly disapproved. Zachary found he did not care. In Hilshire, he held court and delivered verdicts with Kira standing at his side, her presence a comfort. In the village of Ashmore, they walked together through the market, and he bought her a honeycake and a ribbon the color of spring leaves. She wore the ribbon in her hair, and he thought she had never looked more beautiful. The Harrows tried once more in the town of Redbridge. This time, Zachary and Kira were ready. They had warned the local militia, set a watch, and laid plans. When the attackers came, only 3 this time, the family's resources clearly stretched thin, they were met with armed resistance. Kira fought alongside the militia and took down 2 of the attackers herself. The 3rd surrendered. Zachary presided over a swift trial, the evidence damning, and sentenced the man to 20 years of hard labor. "It is over," Kira said that night as they lay in bed together. "The Harrows are broken, for now," Zachary said. "There will always be another threat. Then I will face it with you." He turned to look at her. Her face was soft in the candlelight, her eyes warm. He thought of the contract, of the ridiculous clause that had brought them together, and smiled. "I would like to renegotiate the contract," he said. She raised an eyebrow. "Oh, I would like to extend it indefinitely." "That is a very long contract." "I am a very patient man," she laughed, the sound low and rich. "What are the terms? You remain at my side, I remain at yours. We face whatever comes together." "And the cuddling clause, upgraded," he said, "to include kissing, hand-holding, and whatever else we might think of. That is a very generous offer. Do you accept?" She kissed him by way of answer. When they finally broke apart, both smiling, Kira said, "I should warn you. My people have customs. If you court me, you must be serious. I am. If you offer me a place in your life, it is not temporary, it is permanent. I would not want it any other way." She studied him, searching for doubt, and found none. "Then yes, I accept your terms." They sealed the agreement the way all important contracts should be sealed, with warmth, with tenderness, with the certainty that they had found something rare and worth fighting for. The circuit ended 6 weeks later in the town of Rivermouth. Zachary held his last case, signed his last order, and met with the regional magistrate to deliver his report. The Harrow family was destroyed, their remaining members scattered or imprisoned. The roads were safer. Justice, imperfect but steady, had been served. That evening, Zachary walked along the river with Kira, the water reflecting the sunset in shades of gold and rose. Pemberton had already left for the capital, taking the wagon and documents. It was just the 2 of them, alone. "I have made a decision," Zachary said. Kira looked at him, waiting. "I am stepping down from the circuit." Surprise flickered across her face. "Why?" 3 years ago, I threw myself into work because I could not bear to stop. If I stopped, I would have to think about what I had lost." He took her hand. "But I have found something now, someone, and I want to build a life that is not just about running from ghosts." "What will you do?" "I have been offered a position as a regional magistrate, here in Rivermouth, a permanent post, no more traveling." He squeezed her hand. "I want to stay if you will stay with me." She was quiet for a moment, looking out at the water. Then she reached into her belt and pulled out the contract, now worn and creased from months of travel. She tore it in half. "Kira, I do not need a contract," she said, tearing it again. The pieces fluttered into the river, carried away by the current. "I do not need clauses or obligations. I need you and you need me, and that is enough." Zachary pulled her close, his forehead resting against hers. "It is more than enough." They were married 3 months later, in a small ceremony by the river. Pemberton came from the capital to stand as witness, and the regional magistrate officiated. There were no grand guests, no elaborate celebration, just two people choosing each other in front of the world. Kira wore a dress the color of summer sky, and Zachary thought she looked like something out of a dream. When it came time for vows, he spoke from the heart. "I promise to stand beside you," he said, his voice steady, "to face whatever comes, to love you in all seasons, to honor the gift of your presence in my life." Kira's vows were simpler. "I promise to guard your heart as I guarded your life, to be your partner, your comfort, your home." They kissed to the sound of the river, and it was perfect. They made their home in a small house on the edge of Rivermouth, near enough to the courthouse for Zachary's work, but far enough for privacy. Kira took on work as a security consultant, training guards and advising merchants. Her reputation grew. The orc woman who had protected the circuit judge became a figure of respect. Life was good. Life was ordinary. Zachary held court, delivered verdicts, and came home to Kira each evening. They cooked together, argued over whose turn it was to chop firewood, and fell asleep in each other's arms every night. On cold nights, Kira would pull him close and say, invoking the cuddling clause, and Zachary would laugh and hold her tighter. Clause accepted. 2 years after their marriage, Kira came to Zachary with news. He was reviewing case files in his study when she appeared in the doorway, her expression carefully neutral. "I have something to tell you," she said. He set down his papers. "What is it?" "I am with child." The world stopped. Then it rushed back in, bright and overwhelming. Zachary crossed the room in 3 strides and wrapped her in his arms. "Truly, truly." He kissed her, laughing against her mouth. "We are going to be parents, we are." She pulled back, her eyes bright. "Are you afraid?" "Terrified," he admitted, "and happier than I have ever been." Their son was born in early spring, small and squalling and perfect. They named him Samuel, and Zachary held the baby with shaking hands while Kira watched from the bed, exhausted and radiant. "He has your eyes," Zachary said. "And your temper, if that crying is any indication." Samuel grew into a bright, curious boy with his mother's green skin and his father's dark hair. He toddled after Kira when she practiced with her sword, and sat in Zachary's lap during quiet evenings, listening to his father read case law as though it were poetry. When Samuel was 3, Kira gave birth to their daughter, Nadia. She was smaller than her brother, with pointed ears and a gap-toothed smile that could melt the sternest heart. She adored her brother and drove him to distraction in equal measure, the house filled with laughter and noise and love. Zachary's work continued, steady and fulfilling, and Kira's reputation brought opportunities she had never imagined. They were invited to speak at a regional summit on improving relations between humans and orcs. Kira's words, practical and unflinching, swayed minds. Change came slowly, but it came. One evening, when Samuel was 7 and Nadia 4, Zachary came home to find Kira in the garden, teaching their children to plant seeds. Samuel dug enthusiastically, flinging dirt everywhere. Nadia carefully placed each seed as though it were made of glass. Zachary stood in the doorway, watching, and felt the weight of old ghosts finally lift. Marcus would have liked this, he thought, would have been happy to see him happy. "Thank you," Zachary whispered to the memory, "for giving me this." Kira looked up and caught his eye. She smiled and he smiled back, and the moment stretched between them, full of unspoken understanding. That night, after the children were asleep, Zachary and Kira sat together on their porch, watching the stars. She leaned against him, his arm around her shoulders, her head on his chest. "Do you ever think about the contract?" she asked. "Which part?" "The cuddling clause," he laughed softly. "Every day. It was a good clause. It was a ridiculous clause, he corrected, and the best thing that ever happened to me. She tilted her head up to kiss him. I love you, Zachary Rourke. I love you, Kira Larenth. They sat together under the stars, bound not by paper or ink, but by choice and love and the life they had built together. The world was still hard, still full of prejudice and danger, but they had each other, and that was enough. More than enough. It was everything. Years passed, each one adding new layers to their story. Samuel grew tall and serious, inheriting his father's love of justice and his mother's fierce protectiveness. He announced at 14 that he wanted to study law, and Zachary felt pride swell in his chest. Nadia was wild and bright, always climbing trees and asking questions that had no easy answers. She wanted to be an explorer, a warrior, 100 different things. When Samuel was 16 and Nadia 13, Zachary was offered a position on the High Court in the capital. It was a tremendous honor, a recognition of years of fair and thoughtful service. He brought the offer home and laid it before Kira. "What do you want to do?" she asked. "I want to know what you want." They sat together at the kitchen table, the letter between them. Outside, the children were sparring in the yard, their laughter drifting through the open window. The capital would be good for them, Kira said slowly. Better schools, more opportunities. But this is home. Zachary took her hand. Then we stay. You would turn down the High Court. I would turn down anything that makes you unhappy. He squeezed her fingers. My place is with you, here in the capital, anywhere, as long as we are together. She smiled, her eyes bright. You are still the strangest man, and you are still the most extraordinary woman. They stayed in Rivermouth. Zachary continued as regional magistrate, and his decisions were cited in capital courts as models of fairness. Kira trained a generation of guards, and her methods became standard across 3 territories. Their children grew, found their own paths, and made them proud. On their 20th anniversary, Zachary woke to find Kira already awake, watching him in the morning light. Her hair had threads of silver now, and lines creased the corners of her eyes, but she was as beautiful as the day he had first seen her standing in his office. "Good morning," he said. "Good morning." She touched his face, her thumb tracing his jaw. 20 years. 20 years, he agreed. Do you have any regrets? She laughed. I thought we agreed never to ask that question. We did. I am breaking the rule. Then no, she said seriously. Not a single one. You. Only that I did not meet you sooner. We met when we were meant to. He pulled her close, and they lay together as they had for 20 years, warm and safe and content. The cuddling clause, invoked by habit now, by love, by the simple fact of their existence together. Samuel married at 23, a bright young woman from the capital who was studying medicine. Nadia traveled, sending letters from distant territories, full of stories about mountains and deserts and peoples they had never heard of. The house grew quieter but no less full of love. When Zachary turned 65, he finally retired. He had served 40 years as a judge, delivered thousands of verdicts, and shaped countless lives. It was enough. He wanted time now, time with Kira, time to enjoy the garden and read books that had nothing to do with law. They took long walks by the river, the same river where they had been married. They visited their children and delighted in their grandchildren, 3 from Samuel, 2 from Nadia, each one precious. They grew old together, slowly and gracefully, and never ran out of things to say. On a spring evening in their 43rd year of marriage, Zachary and Kira sat on their porch as the sun set. His hand was in hers, their fingers intertwined. His hair was white now, his body stiff with age, but he was happy. I was thinking, Kira said, dangerous. She elbowed him gently. About the contract. You are always thinking about that contract. It was a good contract. It was a manipulative contract, he said fondly. You knew exactly what you were doing. I did, she admitted. I saw a man who needed someone to care for him and decided I would be that person. Why? Because you were worth it. She squeezed his hand. Because even then I think I knew. Knew what? That I would love you for the rest of my life. Zachary's throat tightened. After 43 years, she could still make him feel like a young man discovering love for the first time. I am a lucky man, he said. We are both lucky. They sat in comfortable silence, watching the stars emerge. Somewhere in the house a clock chimed the hour. The night was cool, but they were warm, always warm together. Kira, Zachary said softly. Yes, thank you. For what? For everything. For the contract, for the clause, for choosing me. She turned to look at him, her eyes soft. I would choose you again. In every life, in every world, I would choose you. He kissed her, tender and slow, and tasted salt. He was crying, he realized, tears of gratitude and joy and love so vast he could not contain it. I love you, he whispered. I love you, she whispered back. They held each other as the night deepened. Two souls bound by something stronger than any contract, any clause, any words written in ink. They were bound by choice, by trust, by the shared weight of a life well lived. And when they finally rose and went inside, Kira's hand in his, Zachary thought of the terrified man he had been the day she walked into his office. How broken he had felt, how certain that he did not deserve protection or love or happiness. She had seen past all of that, had seen something worth saving, and she had saved him in every way that mattered. They climbed the stairs together slowly, their bodies old but their hearts young. They lay down in the bed they had shared for 43 years, and Kira pulled him close. Invoking the cuddling clause, she murmured. Zachary smiled in the darkness. Clause accepted. They slept, wrapped in each other's arms, and dreamed of a green-skinned woman and a weary judge and a contract that had changed everything. In the morning, there would be breakfast and grandchildren visiting and the simple joys of another day. But for now, there was only warmth and peace and the steady rhythm of two hearts beating as one. It was enough. It was everything. It was love.